Welcome to The Stumbling Spirit, contemplations on the path of resilience. Whether you realize it or not, you are resilient. It's your birthright. As you take in your next breath, know this truth. It's not only about your capacity to overcome difficult situations, but it's about your courage to do the necessary work to heal, learn, grow, and move forward. What you gain is invaluable wisdom. And it's through these hard stumbles in life that we often discover a new purpose that aligns with our spirit. My name is Fabio da Silva Fernandez, Reiki Master, Mindfulness Coach, and Mystical Explorer. Join me weekly as the Stumbling Spirit podcast highlights the lives of extraordinary people like you, sharing transformative stories and beneficial practices of resilience to guide you on your wellness journey. Sharleen Beaumont is an empowerment coach who helps people improve their emotional literacy, both personally and professionally. When it comes to experiencing loss and navigating through life's most challenging transitions, such as divorce and career changes, Sharleen works with her clients to reframe their limiting belief systems, reimagine their lives, and create action plans to help them grow and become the best version of themselves. Sharleen is here to give us tips on letting go, dealing with our messiness, and cultivating a brave new ending. It's a pleasure to welcome entrepreneur, consultant, and friend Sharleen Beaumont to the show. Hi, Sharleen.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Can you share a bit of your personal story and what inspired you to start your consulting business called Brave New Ending in 2016?
Yeah, definitely. I actually started out in victim services at a young age, which is working with the Waterloo Regional Police and helping people through a tough transition time. And from there, I kind of moved over to mediation, which I did with the courts. Then I moved on to communications. Everything that I've done as I'm speaking, it just kind of is an evolution of like the communication part and the people part. And just even though I did move on to various companies that I've helped, there was just, I think, that one tie of wanting to help people through transitions, the communication aspect, and I think it was just an evolution of wanting to coach and help. I wanted to do it back in 2005. I wanted to start coaching, and I didn't at the time. I just didn't think that I had enough of the life skills. You know, life was pretty easy at that point, I would say. I always say be careful what you wish for, because I definitely got a lot more of tough life experiences that I can bring to the table and relate. Really, it's an opportunity to relate with a lot of clients and the tough transitions of life and what they're going through. So I think that's why I decided to be in coaching, and then also to get back into the corporate, which is most recent, is because I did some interviews and talking to people and just finding out that emotional awareness, emotional intelligence, whatever you want to call it, is just so desperately still needed, and probably even more so today.
You mentioned that you had gone through some struggles of your own. Do you want to talk about any of that?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think a big one that I can relate to a lot of people is divorce. I went through a divorce back in 2009, so that was not an easy transition. And I think I wanted to skip over that. I thought, you know what, I'm good. I want to skip over these tough emotions and just like quickly move on. And that's not reality. You know, now for divorce, over 50% of people get divorced. And I think for second marriages, it's over 60. The reality is a lot of people are struggling through that. They don't understand that the transition and the emotions that are involved. And I was no different, even though with like I had training, and it doesn't mean that I'm exempt from feeling emotions of grief. Grief is a big one that people just think that grief is for when somebody has died. It's not. It can happen in all like many aspects of life. And we need to like, in my case, and in clients' cases, where we just really need to take that time to grieve and be compassionate with ourselves and not just skip over the emotions.
Yeah, I was looking at stats talking about divorce, and I was actually floored by this, actually. It was astonishing to me to see that, and this is based on numbers posted on Statista. In 2022, 2.78 million people divorced in Canada. So there's only a population of roughly 39 million people, and that's 7% of the population of Canada. I was shocked by that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. And if you dive even deeper into it, a lot of people are still married, but they're not happy in their marriage. I have clients come to me and it comes out like they've been in marriages for, we're talking 10, 20 years that they know that they should have been out of sooner. We're not talking like 1, 2, 5 years. We're talking decades.
I know that there might be a lot of factors as to why relationships break down, but why do you think it is that so many people are unhappy in their relationships?
I think I'm going to go back to what I think a big foundation is people not looking at themselves and, what's going on for them, what has gone on for them, and doing the work, I think, to be the best version of themselves. Sometimes I think we just get stuck in patterns of doing what we did and not recognizing that what, we can change and we can evolve and we can grow. And I think a lot of people just think they have to go through the motions. I hope that people now are coming into a realization that relationships do take work. And the biggest relationship that takes the most work is the relationship with yourself.
That's a really good point because I guess if you don't know yourself, how could you enter into a relationship with someone else? Or at least, how can you enter into a healthy relationship with someone else? So there's that aspect of it too. It's sort of like maybe these people found each other at a time that they didn't know themselves and they just got into the relationship for the wrong reasons to begin with. And then they're in the situation for years and they're unhappy, but they don't know how to get out of it.
Yeah, that's it. It's actually men. A lot of men, basically, they do want to get out of it, but they want to get out of it with grace and compassion. Often it's not that they don't love the other person, they just know that this is no longer the life that they can live. This is where I talk about people pleasing. A lot of people pleasing comes into play because I think a lot of people have a belief that if they're pleasing other people, then they're doing the right thing. And really, we're just doing a disservice to ourselves. I call it, rather than people pleasing, people deceiving, because you're being deceptive to yourself, but you're also being deceptive to the people around you.
It's also draining.
It's definitely draining. It's draining being somebody who you authentically are not. And I know that word gets overused, but it's the right word. It's exhausting. And I think that's it. I think people have just come to the place where they're like, I'm exhausted. I can no longer do this. Something needs to change. It's something that takes them to finally realize this isn't working for me anymore.
Well, this is a really interesting topic because it's, as you say, it's not only about married people, but it's just about people in relationships in general. We're all human, and it's very easy for us to get stuck in our messiness, and often we're the cause of our messiness as we move through life. There are certain patterns that we get ourselves into, and you've identified a few of them, such as reacting versus responding, being self sabotaging, resisting change. So these patterns are obviously unhealthy. How and why do we get into these kinds of unhealthy patterns that really limit us from being able to live healthy lives?
I think it's the brain's way is to a lot of times look for the negative because it wants to keep us safe. So, in wanting to keep us safe, it just is doing the minimal work. Well, we get in these patterns because, like I said, the brain wants to do the least amount of work and what's the easiest. And it just goes on autopilot, and it goes on autopilot with what's familiar, what it knows, familiar from family, like, and then going back to growing up and what you knew. And so that's the easiest thing because you don't have to challenge yourself. You're just like on autopilot. And think about, when you're driving a destination, like how many times have we I know personally, like I've gotten from one place to another and I'm like, whoa, I don't remember like getting there, have to drive there sometimes because my mind is just wandering. But I think that we're conserving, we're trying to conserve our energy, we're trying to just do patterns. And so it takes that extra effort to, I want to even say, kind of deceive your own brain to look at things differently, look at new perspectives, challenge yourself to step outside of that comfort zone of what you know, the same thing that you're repetitively doing, and try something different. It's scary. It's fear. We often go into just not wanting to change because it's better to be with the devil you know than the devil you don't.
Also, anger is so easily accessible to us as well.
Yes, anger is, an interesting emotion. It's definitely one that is a go-to for a lot of people because, like you said, like it is easy, but underneath anger is a lot of other emotions that people don't realize. So when somebody's getting angry, there's a lot of times fear underneath there as well. That's why recognizing your emotions, it's good to understand what is really going on for you. That's why naming emotions is so important because like people get angry, and if you've ever seen an anger iceberg, I will show this sometimes in trainings. It's like underneath that anger there could be grief, there's embarrassed, exhausted, it could be envious, it could be offended, it could be rejected. Like there's a lot under anger. And the other thing is about anger gets a really bad rap because people think that it's just not acceptable, like it's really not a great emotion. But the thing is, all emotions, like they're not good or bad, they're just allowing you to recognize and say like, hey, something is wrong, I'm not in alignment with who I am or who I want to be or my best self, whichever wording you want to use. And it's just like alerting you, and it's saying like, okay, what do I need to do here, what do I need to change? A lot of times people think anger is them being out of control, but that's not always the case. And the other thing is how anger can be great is, you know what, sometimes you got to get mad enough to create the change you want in your life. So I actually, when working with people one to one, sometimes I push them to get angry because that raises them up on the emotional scale. They need to get pissed off enough to create the change that I know they want to create. And it can be a great energy as well. Like I said, it can get a bad rap, but it can also be very, very useful, and you can use it as jet fuel.
This is part of the emotional awareness that you help people to cultivate. We've been through a lot over the past number of years with COVID, et cetera. Do you find that with recent events that it's making it more challenging for people to navigate these difficult emotions?
Yes, I would say I find that there's a lot more stress and overwhelm, not just out of COVID, but just even today with everything going on beyond COVID. I think that, I talk about values and people tapping into their value and value words. And some people, they were still trying to identify with who they were pre-COVID. And that's not reality. Like we've all come out differently. We're not the same people that we were pre-COVID. We have all, I believe, hopefully evolved and changed. But sometimes when going through transitions, we want to hang on to the past and we don't want to move on to the future because, like, again, we feel safe. But it's kind of like the kids when the monkey bars at the playground. You have to let go of the one bar to swing over to the next bar. That's just life. And it's just coming into awareness of what is really going on for each individual. I mean, everyone has experienced it differently, but in a lot of ways, it's been the same.
Sharleen, can you explain to us what empowerment means?
Yes, empowerment, how I see it, is when we make decisions in life when we're at a higher place on the emotional scale. I often talk about the scale because the lower emotions, which you should not be making decisions in, are shame, guilt, apathy, victimhood, grief, fear. That's not an empowered place to be making good decisions. And I often feel like again, like I talk about these lower emotions and it seems like a kind of downer, but the fact is, you can't change what you're not willing to see. So to get to the empowerment level, you have to clean up those lower emotions and why you're there and why you keep going back there and what's going on and the stories you're telling yourself. And as you rise up, then you are able to be in that place of empowerment. And that's the place that you have more energy, you're able to again make good decisions, your relationships are stronger. And it's not that you're going to be there all the time, it's just that you want to be there more often than not. To get to empowerment, like I said, you're cleaning up these lower emotions, but you're also where the change takes place is everything is on a logarithmic scale for emotions. And where you can see that change takes place is courage. Courage is basically the switching. It's the asking yourself, well, what would courage have me do? When you start asking yourself questions in courage, you're willing to explore yourself, discover more, and you're just trying to make your life better because you felt the energy previously and you know that you can be in that energy. And I think it's just wanting to be in that energy more.
So, where does emotional literacy come in?
I talk about emotional literacy because I think that a lot of people don't even recognize what emotion they're in. Like that statistically, I believe it's like people know 4 or 5 emotions. And that may be generous, to be honest. A lot of people just don't understand what's even going on for them. And awareness is the biggest piece. Like being able to say, oh, I'm in that emotion. Okay, what's the story I'm telling myself? What's going on for me? Is this true?
And so, why is that important? Why is it important to know the full range of our emotion and connecting with our emotions in that way?
If we don't know what emotion we're in, then we can't move through it. We can't move on to the next emotion. The lowest emotion is shame. Everyone has carried shame at some point or another. And what that feels like low energy. It could be weak boundaries, feeling disconnected from others, feeling like they're flawed. And it's important to do some interventions and reflecting and recognizing why you feel that shame. A lot of times people are carrying shame from, again, decades back. This isn't just like shame, like, last week, a year ago. We're talking decades. And that's an emotion that drags you down. Everyone wants to feel lighter. They want to feel like they have that joy. And so it's important to clean up the lower emotions. The next emotion is guilt above shame. And again, we've all felt this. These are all emotions that everybody feels, but not everyone is willing to look at. They want to sweep them under the carpet, ignore them, pretend they're not there, and move on. The thing is, what we ignore, it just gets built up more and more, and it'll rise again, and it'll rise even stronger.
What is the main reason, do you think, that people don't want to look at those difficult emotions?
It's exhausting. To be blunt. It can be like to do the work it can be hard. It can be exhausting. I always equate it to taking a beach volleyball and holding it under the water, trying to keep it under the water. And it's not until like you do the work and we start working together that they actually start to feel the relief. It's like then the ball pops up out of the water, it's released, and there's that sense of why was I taking so long to do this? Why was I trying to hold this ball under the water for so long? What was I, gaining by this? But again, it's just they think that they're keeping themselves safe. And in actual fact, doing the work and understanding what is going on for you is actually the biggest relief.
You say that there are 3 steps to navigating through change and transition, and I'd like to go through each of them with you. So the first one is acknowledging and grieving the loss. So this could be any loss in our life. So can you explain a little bit about what that means?
Yes, in transitions, the first thing is to acknowledge what we've lost, and we're starting with an ending. So before you can, again, this is where we want to be present, look at where we're at, rather than skip to the end and dismiss everything. So the ending is a lot about feelings of anger, being in denial, fear, and sad. And so that's the ending where we have to like recognize, hey, this is where I am. I am feeling sad at the end of my relationship. I may have been in denial. This is all grief. Again, it's an ending. So in death, society sees when somebody dies and we see the grief, and there's the funeral, there's the casseroles and the cookies and the cards. But in moving through a transition like divorce and other transitions, it could be job loss, it could be even a new baby, it could be a new house, but just like giving up one thing and then moving on to the next. So that's the ending, like accepting and saying like, wow, this is an end of something, and acknowledging that.
And then the second point that you talk about is navigating through the neutral zone. So help us understand what the neutral zone is. I know that it's based on the transition model by William Bridges, but can you just explain what the neutral zone is?
So the neutral zone is the messy middle. It's also been described as the messy middle. You're more confused, disoriented. You are definitely not sure which way to go, which way to turn. It's just messy. It's where people get stuck. It's stuck in making decisions. That's basically it's the stuckness.
Right. In this model, in this transition model, the neutral zone sits in the middle between the ending, whatever the ending is, and the new beginning.
Yes. And the ending, which is actually the new beginning, which marks the final stage of a transition. So that's where once you've gone through that messy middle part and kind of like you're in a tug of war with yourself, then now you're going to a new beginning and you come into acceptance and integration of the change. And, emotions during that stage are more hope and excitement and a renewed sense of purpose. I can see that in so many people that are in transitions and what stage they're at and where they're at. I talk about it because I think it's important for us to have acceptance and realize, oh, okay, I'm going through a transition, I'm in the end stage right now, and that's not gonna feel so great, and now I'm in the messy middle. I think it's just important for people to like realize these stages so they can see them in themselves and have some compassion and acceptance to where they're at rather than being a tug of war and get stuck and fight with themselves, really.
You say the third step is creating a new vision and
Hmm.
plan for the future.
Hmm.
So, can you explain what that's about?
I think it's finally the acceptance that, what, this can be the acceptance of something new. Like, what is that going to be? What's that going to look like? So having that desire for something more. So having that pull to accept the change.
These are hard steps, though, right? Because, I mean, they're very broad. These are very, very broad categories. Like on the one hand, we have acknowledging and grieving the loss. Then it's sort of getting through that messy middle that you're talking about, which can last a really long time. And then it's the third part, which is, creating a new vision for the future. But sometimes there's a lot of uncertainty about what that future might look like. And so that's really sticky as well.
Yes, this is definitely like broad strokes because when you're working with individuals, then you can get more in depth as to what's specifically going on for them. But this is definitely a framework that I feel even knowing the framework is helpful in moving through and the acceptance. But also, there's emotional support that is needed through transitions. It's not, saying like, here you go, figure this out on your own. Like it's important to have emotional support through all that. And also to encourage that there is a positive aspect. And with any change, you just have to like, you may not see it at the time, but a lot of times it could be in retrospect, but just like acceptance that change is inevitable. And you don't know. It's the not knowing and the trusting of the not knowing, but having faith that this is something that is going to be better for you.
We talked about divorce earlier, and you give 5 ways of helping people that have gone through the death of a marriage to let go. So let's go through each of them. The first one is allowing yourself to grieve, which is something that we talked about earlier. Why is the grief process important in relation to the ending of a marriage?
We can't properly move on if we don't grieve what we've lost. Like there's so much loss. There could be loss of a best friend, loss of it's not just like material things, like loss of a home. But it could be loss of security, loss of the way you knew life to be, loss of what you thought your life was going to be moving forward. There's so many losses that we need to look at and take the time to grieve them and say like, that sucks, like that's sad, I'm not happy about that. So it's important to move through that emotion and name everything that you're losing, list them out, write them out, because that's the only way to really move through it.
The second one you talk about is acknowledging and processing your anger. This is a big one.
It is, I think, recognizing again, like going back to anger, like it's okay to be angry. That's part of the process. It's not a happy process for the majority of people. Anger is also, like I said, there's a lot of underlying in anger. There could be guilt of, oh, well, I could have and should have done this. And living in the could have and should haves is not going to help you to move forward. That's going to help you to stay stuck, to be honest. So it's okay to be angry, but it's okay to also say, like, I tried this and it didn't work. And that's okay.
The third one you talk about is this also happens, and I've had this happen to me as well. I've not been through a divorce, but I've gone through breakups, is recognizing that friendships will end or change.
Yes. We don't realize that we play a part in other people's lives. And when we change, we no longer are playing that part. And that makes people around us also feel uncomfortable because people like people to stay the same. So when you're changing, and this is not just in a divorce, this is also in life. I don't know if you've ever heard of the story of the crab bucket. Basically, the crab trying to get out of the bucket, and what crabs do is they will keep pulling the other crab back down because they want to all stay the same. Like they don't want anyone getting out. And I kind of feel this is the same with friendships. Some people are more accepting, and especially if they've been through it themselves, and others are not so much, because they're like looking at themselves and how it's affecting their lives. Oh, now we can't hang out with them as a couple. Oh, I can only talk to this person. They put up limitations on themselves. So relationships do change. And again, it's all acceptance and just knowing that the friends that will be there for you during that time, they'll rise to the top.
The fourth way of letting go after a divorce is prioritizing self care. So let's talk about that.
Self-care is essential. Relationships, like the breakdown, it can be exhausting. And it's not a one and done. You've got to look at this. It's more like preparing for a marathon. A lot of times, divorces can be messy and breakups can be messy. And you know what? It is. It's preparing for a marathon. So it's important to get proper sleep, put food in your body that fuels you, connect with nature, surround yourself with people who can listen without judgment, and find ways to bring good energy into your life. And I think it's also a great time to just tap into yourself and recognize, okay, well, what brings me joy?
And I guess part of that self care too is just acknowledging all of those difficult emotions as well, right?
Absolutely. It's awareness, 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 awareness of your emotions, awareness of what's going on for you, awareness of what makes you happy. It's key.
Number five is leaving behind the old self and embracing the new identity. Let's talk about that a little bit.
As you evolve again, like you're not the same person. I can talk personally, I guess, even ending my marriage, that was part of my identity of who I was with, being married. That was part of my identity. And so I had to realize like that was no longer who I was. So being okay with that and being able to say, okay, well, now who am I going to be? Like, you can look at it positively as well. Like, this is time to, recreate. What can I recreate here? And again, this all takes time. It's not an overnight thing, but it can be a time of excitement as well. You start to build a new life that aligns with you more than your previous life. You can look at your values and your aspirations and just looking for, that joy and fulfillment. And then you'll have new activities, new relationships, and you'll build your confidence. And so that's something to look forward to as well.
One of the offerings that you have is something called the ACE program, ACE standing for Awareness, Choice, and Empowered Action. Can you describe what that is and what you offer?
Yes, that's my one-to-one program. It's a 90-day. Also, I do a 6-month program where I work with somebody one-to-one, and we will meet on a regular basis. I talk a lot about what I've talked about today, but it's individualized in many ways. And we just move through what they're going through. And what happens a lot of times is people come to me, they think that they, want to work through one thing, and it actually ends up being about something else. I enjoy it because I find that there's, like I said, a lot of clients get relief and they're like, oh, wow, like I wish I would have known that sooner. And it's a great feeling to know that, all the aha moments that people get when they do the work.
Do you have any success stories that you can share with us?
Yes. I think an example would be one client, again, who wanted to move through his divorce with grace. And I find that in doing the work with me, that they're able to open up and talk freely. I've had clients say that. They're like, you're so easy to talk to. So what I encourage is in the conversations and through the work we do together is actually to go back and have those tough conversations. Now, like I say that if you're not having the tough conversations on the front end, you're going to end up having the tough conversations on the back end. And so it's important to have the tough conversations. I encourage this with my children as well. Whenever they have something that's going on, I will say, this is a conversation. So I think communications, and bringing back my history in communications as well, like it's a part of that. So what that client specifically had learned is to be able to communicate with his wife at the time, or who he was looking to end the marriage with, and having those conversations, even though they weren't easy, and creating that space. And also I work with them to lead the conversation so that it is done respectfully.
That's really important. What is one thing that you would want to share to someone who is struggling through a major life event at the moment?
Compassion. Definitely be compassionate to yourself. I think that a lot of times we go into self-lashing, beating ourselves up, and no change is created in that space. In fact, it'll keep us stuck, as opposed to if we have compassion to where we're at, as if we're having compassion to a friend in that situation, that we would move through it quicker, and I would even say easier. It's be compassionate to yourself.
What does resilience mean to you?
I think resilience is taking action towards more of what we want and less of what we don't want. I think I also tie in resilience with action, because when we take action towards what we want, we are building trust in ourselves. And when we build trust in ourselves, then it also raises our confidence. Resilience is about, by definition, is bending and coming back to shape. But I think that we just might come back into a different shape or a different form, but it's just the being able to bounce back. And I think with resilience, we are able to bounce back easier.
What are your practices of resilience?
Being true to my word. If I say I'm going to do something, do it, so I can have trust in myself. And also a practice that I do and I encourage others to do is write out your successes. Make a list of all your successes that you've gone through, because when we're not feeling resilient, our mind is telling us we're not good enough, or whatever the negative bias that our minds have. So it's good to write down all your successes and see that in actual fact, you've gone through and succeeded a lot in life. And if you don't think you have successes, look again, you do.
How do these practices benefit you?
I think they benefit because in seeing that you have, or I have, or we have, whichever you want to say, succeeded, these successes, then it's like, okay, well, I have done this. A lot of times what happens is we go through life and we succeed at something and then we just go on to the next thing. Well, what's happening is the mind is not getting that hit of dopamine or all the feel good hormones that we need, and then we go on to the next thing. So it's important to go back and celebrate those wins. It's important to look at those successes and say, like, hey, yeah, wow, I did that.
How can people reach you if they want to contact you?
You can find me on LinkedIn at Sharleen Beaumont, also Instagram at Sharleen D. Beaumont. And I have my website is Brave New Ending, www.bravenewending.com.
Thank you so much, Sharleen. I really appreciate you coming on the show. I really appreciate your insights. And I know that this will be very helpful to a lot of people out there going through some difficult transitions in their life. Thanks again.
Thank you for having me. It was great. I really enjoyed talking with you.
Thank you for listening to The Stumbling Spirit, Contemplations on the Path of Resilience. This is Fabio da Silva Fernandez. Join me again next week for another episode of transformative stories and beneficial practices to guide you on your wellness journey. If you wish, you can follow and DM me on Instagram at The Stumbling Spirit. Until next time, take a deep breath and another step forward on your path of resilience.